To the world, he was the ever-smiling, energetic face of Marvel Comics. Stan the Man Lee, an architect of modern mythology. The co-creator of Spider-Man, the Avengers, and the X-Men, who taught us all about power and responsibility. His catchphrase, Excelsior, was a call to always reach higher, a perfect reflection of the boundless optimism he seemed to live by. We saw him in hilarious movie cameos and at packed comic conventions, a beloved grandfather to generations of fans. He wasn't just a pop culture icon. He was a living legend. But behind the iconic glasses and famous catchphrases, Stan Lee's final years were nothing like the superhero stories he helped create. The story the public didn't know was a devastating turn, far more complex and heartbreaking than anyone imagined. It wasn't just a story of physical sickness, but one of immense emotional strain, chaos, and alleged betrayal. It feels like everything started to unravel after one single, heartbreaking event: the death of his wife, Joan. In July 2017, they'd been married for nearly 70 years. And she was so much more than his partner. She was his advocate, his business manager, and his fiercest protector. Stan himself once said she was the girl he had been drawing his entire life. Her passing after a stroke left him not just devastated, but profoundly vulnerable. Without Joan, the steady hand that guided his life for decades was gone. Lee, then in his mid-90s, was left heartbroken and increasingly dependent on others. It was in this state of grief and failing health that the real chaos began. Longtime friends and associates found themselves pushed to the side, replaced by a new inner circle whose motives would quickly come under intense scrutiny. This was no longer just about a man grieving his wife. It was about an icon becoming a target. Almost immediately, Lee's own health took a nosedive. Just months after Joan's death, in January 2018, he was rushed to the hospital with an irregular heartbeat and shortness of breath. Though he was released, it was the first of many health scares that would define his final year. A month later, news broke that he was fighting pneumonia. In a video message to fans, his voice was weak and his breathing was labored, a stark contrast to his usual booming persona. He admitted he was fighting a little bout of pneumonia, but tried to stay positive. He missed his fans, he said, and he hoped to get better soon. But his condition was serious. The pneumonia was a recurring battle, and it was aspiration pneumonia, dangerous infection caused by inhaling foreign material into the lungs. This, combined with respiratory and heart failure, would ultimately be listed as his official cause of death. He also suffered from severe vision problems, which tragically made it almost impossible for him to read the very comic books that were his life's work. Despite his obvious frailty, the demands didn't stop. He was still flown to conventions to sign memorabilia, often appearing exhausted and unwell. Videos from this time are painful to watch. At one Silicon Valley Comic-Con in April 2018, a visibly confused and unsteady Lee was coached on how to spell his own name while signing stacks of merchandise. Eyewitnesses reported he was shuttled between signings and photo ops for hours, sometimes falling asleep between pictures, only to be woken up by his handlers. Fans were horrified, with one writing, "That man is a legend," and you shuffled him around like he was a bag of money. While his body was failing, a different kind of war was raging around him, one for control of his name. His legacy and his fortune estimated to be worth between $50 and $70 million. After Jones' death, Lee became the center of what The Hollywood Reporter called a storm of broken alliances, abrupt expulsions, and allegations of elder abuse. Lawsuits started flying. One former manager, Kaya Morgan, was accused of isolating Lee from his friends and family, taking control of his finances, and embezzling over $5 million in assets. In June 2018, Stan was granted a restraining order against Morgan, who was later charged with multiple counts of elder abuse, including false imprisonment and fraud. Another former associate, Gerardo Olivares, was sued by Lee for allegedly transferring $4.6 million from Lee's bank account without permission. The lawsuit also contained a truly ghoulish allegation that Olivares had a nurse take vials of dyes, with sold as a collectible with DNA ink. His own daughter, J.C. Lee, was also a central figure in the chaos. In a signed declaration, Stan Lee described their relationship as frequently contentious, claiming she would scream at him and become hysterical if he didn't give in to her financial demands. J.C. Lee, in turn, filed her own lawsuits, including one against another former manager, Max Anderson, accusing him of stealing millions in memorabilia and appearance fees and forcing her father to work extreme hours. That lawsuit was settled in May 2025, just before it was set to go to trial. Lee was trapped in the middle of a war fought by those who all claimed they were protecting him. He was allegedly manipulated into signing documents he couldn't properly see or understand, and his name was used to launch confusing lawsuits that he later disavowed. It was a tragic, tangled web of greed and manipulation, preying on a man who had lost both his partner and his health. The story of Stan Lee's final years is a complex and cautionary tale. It forces us to ask tough questions about how we protect our most vulnerable icons. If you've been moved by this story and want to see more content that explores the hidden truths behind the legends we love, please consider subscribing to the channel and hitting that like button. Your support helps us continue to tell these important stories. In his last months, it seems Lee was at least partially aware of the turmoil surrounding him. In what would be his final media interview, he tried to put on a brave face. There really isn't that much drama, he said. As far as I'm concerned, we have a wonderful life. I love my daughter. I'm hoping that she loves me, and I couldn't ask for a better life. If only my wife was still with us. The words were a heartbreaking attempt to project the same heroic optimism he gave his characters, even as his own world was falling apart. The full extent of his suffering may never be known, but a forthcoming documentary, Stan Lee, the final chapter, promises to shed more light on it. It's directed by John Bolerjack, who served as Lee's assistant in his final years and secretly recorded hundreds of hours of footage. In the trailer, Bolerjack says Stan spent his final years enduring mistreatment, manipulation, and betrayal. At the time, I didn't have the power to stop it. But I did have a camera, and I filmed everything. After a successful Kickstarter campaign was ended early due to outside funding, the project aims to finally bring justice to Stan's story. On November 12, 2018, the world lost one of its most iconic storytellers, Stan Lee. At 95 years old, Lee passed away due to heart failure, respiratory failure, and aspiration pneumonia. His death marked the end of a prolific life that had already become the stuff of legend. For generations, Stan Lee wasn't just a writer, editor, or publisher. He was a cultural force, a man who reshaped the landscape of comic books and popular media. From the pages of Marvel Comics to the billion-dollar movie franchises, his characters inspired. Lee's creative vision influenced not just storytelling, but society's understanding of heroism, diversity, and morality. Lee co-created a staggering number of beloved characters: Spider-Man, the X-Men, Iron Man, the Fantastic Four, Black Panther, the Hulk, and so many others. These weren't just caped crusaders or superpowered beings. They were flawed, relatable individuals facing inner struggles, ethical dilemmas, and social issues. He gave us superheroes with human problems, teenagers dealing with adolescence, mutants battling discrimination, and scientists fighting with their own duality. Human touch. This human touch, that strength comes not from perfection, resonated deeply with readers across generations. His legacy is therefore twofold. On one hand, there is the public Stan Lee, the father of modern comics, the man whose creative fingerprints are all over the Marvel Universe. His cameos became fan-favorite moments in dozens of Marvel films, making him a beloved figure far beyond the comic book world. He was more than a creator. He was an ambassador for imagination, championing creativity with a youthful enthusiasm that never seemed to fade. His catchphrase, "Excelsior," became a symbol of striving for greatness and never settling for mediocrity. But there is another side to Lee's story, one that emerged more publicly in the final years of his life. After the death of his beloved wife, Joan, in 2017, Lee's world began to unravel. In his most vulnerable moments, allegations arose that he had become the victim of elder abuse and exploitation. Multiple reports pointed to a chaotic and troubling final chapter. Shifting caregivers, questionable financial decisions, legal battles, and claims of manipulation by those closest to him. Though details remain clouded and much remains unproven, what is clear is that Lee's twilight years were not filled with the peace and dignity one might hope for a man of his stature. This private, tragic legacy casts a sobering light on how society treats its elderly. Even those as iconic as Stan Lee. Here was a man who gave the world stories about champions who protected the innocent, who stood up to injustice, who believed in the goodness of people. In his own time of need, there seemed to be no such hero to protect him. The contrast is deeply painful. The man who built a universe filled with justice, honor, and courage faced a reality that lacked all three. It challenges us to consider how we care for our elders, how we protect legacy figures when the spotlight dims and their vulnerability grows. Lee's story isn't just a cautionary tale about fame and fortunates, a reflection on humanity, on our obligation to the very people who once inspired us. Despite this tragic end, Stan Lee's impact endures. The characters he co-created are not just entertainment, they are modern myths. They teach lessons of resilience, equality, courage, and compassion. They speak to the best parts of ourselves. Enduring influence can never be tarnished. If anything, it becomes more profound when we acknowledge the full scope of his life, not just the triumphs, but the tragedies too. Stan Lee once said, "That person who helps others simply because it should or must be done, and because it is the right thing to do, is indeed, without a doubt, a real superhero." By that definition, Lee himself was the very thing he spent a lifetime imagining. In remembering him, we must celebrate both the worlds he created and learn from the world he left behind. His public legacy will live on in comic books, movies, and the imaginations of fans around the globe. But his private legacy, painful as it may be, must also serve as a call to action, a reminder that even our greatest heroes are human, and they deserve to be protected, not just admired.